Hi there, my name is Darren. I'm just going to talk to you about dealing with vulnerable clients. So first of all, let's have a look at who is vulnerable. Could be anybody really, couldn't it? What do we mean by vulnerable? Well, the FCA definition is a bit vague and wishy-washy, but who is vulnerable? For example, this guy here, obviously needing some medical care. Would he be vulnerable? Well, most certainly we'd say so. And most people who work in the later life space, like I do, are obviously used to dealing with older and more frail people who the assumption is generally that they may be vulnerable. But being old in itself isn't a case of being vulnerable, it's just being old. I know many people who are older, in their 70s, maybe even 80s, who are fully able to make their own decisions, understand complicated processes, etc. We can't just assume that someone's vulnerable because they're older, although we instantly start to act as if they may be when we're dealing with older people. But what about these people here? That's a family, typical family, mum, dad. This is actually a brother and sister. You might have assumed husband and wife, brother and sister, and two little kiddies. Who's vulnerable here? Well, let's look at mum and dad first. They're in their 70s, so potentially vulnerable. They're both on their state pensions only, struggling a little bit financially. So yes, I'd say they were vulnerable. But they're both fully aware of what they're doing, fully understanding, so not vulnerable in that respect. And you look at the son. Now he is single, has overcommitted himself on his credit cards, has a big expensive car that he can't afford to run really, rents a flat that he can't really afford based on his income. He's vulnerable too because he's struggling financially. Doesn't really understand finances, and someone needs to help him through that process, help him plan his finances. Step to the daughter. This is Jane. Jane, recently divorced. She's a school teacher. So she's, again, relatively intelligent, seems to know what's going on, but the divorce has been difficult. Her husband's fighting over the children. There's financial issues arising. And whilst on the face of it, she may seem okay, when you sit down and talk to her, you have to be very aware of her situation. It's not necessarily her age or anything like that. It's her situation. It's making her vulnerable. She's prone to break down during the meetings we have. So we have to be very careful. I'm aware of her situation. But obviously, when she deals with my office staff, they may not be. So it's important that when you're dealing with vulnerable clients, you make sure that all of your processes within your business will actually ensure that all of your staff will treat the same clients in the same way and assume that everybody has a potential vulnerability. And don't just assume that it's easy to spot. Obviously, if someone has a visible disability, you can see they're vulnerable potentially. And you can understand where their vulnerability might be. But you can't see if someone is emotionally upset. They might have been recently bereaved. Their parents may have died. Their partners may have died. They may have gone through marital difficulties. The children may be struggling at school. The children may be special needs. And they may need special attention, which puts a strain on the family and makes the family more vulnerable. All of these things make people vulnerable. So there is no one size fits all to vulnerability. And some vulnerability is only temporary. If you're in the present market at the moment, we're going through this coronavirus. If your parents are currently ill and you've been told to stay away from them by the authorities, that makes you vulnerable. And while your parent is ill, they're vulnerable. What happens to them if their partner's sitting there panicking about what's going to happen next? If they recover, things get better, and the coronavirus is over and done with, they won't be vulnerable anymore. Just because they're old doesn't make them vulnerable, but being ill could do. So these are the things you need to be aware of. So when you're dealing with vulnerable clients, think everybody is potentially vulnerable. Not everybody is vulnerable just because they're getting divorced, just because they're getting old, just because they have a medical problem. But if you've just been told you've got cancer you're probably very vulnerable for a while after that until you come to terms with that, no matter what type of cancer it is. If you've just been told your parents are dying, you're vulnerable, particularly if you're very close to them or you're the only child. So all these things are vulnerabilities that may come and go. And obviously when you're dealing with a client, until you get to know that client, you've got to be aware that these things might exist, but you don't know yet. So treat every client with care. Think about what they may be vulnerable to and act accordingly. And get your business and your team to act accordingly. Don't just assume because someone's old. Don't assume anything. Likewise, if you're an older person and you're not vulnerable, you don't want people talking down to you. So just be conscious of that. And that's me for today. I'm going to stop at that. And we'll take it as see what the next issue brings.